Edgar Carruthers. I've mentioned Edgar Carruthers before. He was. I've always been very, very sorry I didn't know Edgar Carruthers. He must have been quite a man. He was born in Bishop Stortford, the son of James Carruthers, who'd come down in the 1860s, 1870s from Scotland to make his fortune. Hundreds, thousands of Scotch people were coming south in those days to Essex and that area, mainly to take over farms, which Essex people couldn't make any money out of, but the Scots could. But James Carruthers wasn't a farmer. He, I don't quite know what he did. But I think he started up the credit trade. He had a large warehouse which was full of clothing and boots and shoes and items of furniture and all sorts of extraordinary things, which his men, and some of them were his sons, sold around the villages. They went from house to house, collecting the dues every week and then supplying people with the necessities. But you see, the area around Bishop Stortford in those days was very different from what it's like nowadays. It was very cut off. People living in villages had very, very little access to anything outside their own village. The buses came, motor buses came in the first 5, 6, 7 years of the 20th century, I suppose. Bicycles slowly became available. But it was a habit of villagers, of course, to go to Bishop Stortford on Thursday, which was market day. But apart from that, they didn't have much opportunity for shopping. So this is what my grandfather profited from. My father always said that they made an enormous profit margin, but I mean, I think you probably needed to make quite a decent profit margin because I think the people were very slow payers. They hadn't got any money. I mean, in fact, they were mainly farm labourers. And making money, selling things to farm labourers has always been a dodgy business, or it was in those days. They were paid 12 and sixpence a week, for heaven's sake, those people. They really were poor. James had a lot of children, about 8 or 9 children, and Edgar was the middle one, but also by far the most enterprising. I mean, he sort of kept the family, and he built up this business, and he married Mary Boyton, who was a farmer's daughter from Roxwell near Chelmsford, and he obviously started making money before the First World War because he bought himself quite a nice house in Apton Road, and then during the war he obviously made a bit of money because when the war was over he bought this great big house, Carfield, in Haddon Road, Bishop Stortford, and set up as in quite a bit of style, really. I mean, he was one of the first people in the town to have a telephone and a car and all that sort of thing. When you think that he was a town councillor and a Baptist preacher, and that he'd made his money by selling things to local poor people, it's surprising, really. He seems to have been quite an entertaining fellow. People said how amusing he was, which is not really what you would have expected from somebody in his position. Recently, I was in Bishop Stortford at the museum there, and the girl who's the curator at the museum said to me, "What? You're a grandson of Edgar? I never thought I would meet a grandson of Edgar Carruthers," she said, because she'd been studying the history of the early 20th century history of Bishop Stortford, and Edgar Carruthers featured quite loudly in it, really. I mean, she'd been particularly interested in the fact that he'd been chairman of the, what do they call it? Not the committee, there was a name for it. The group who interviewed conscientious objectors, something board. And if you were a conscientious objector in the First World War, 1914 to 1918, you had to prove that it was conscientious and that you weren't just shirking. And you had to go before this committee, and if they didn't accept your explanations, you could be sent to jail. And but apparently Edgar Carruthers was much more lenient than most people, and he let them off and gave people jobs. I know, for instance, David Flack, who was a conscientious objector and was later one of my grandfather's gardeners. He was sent to work at the sewage farm in Bishop Stortford for the whole of the war, which may have been, I think it was pretty unpleasant, but it was better than being shot at in the trenches. Right, now I have got, what I'm looking at now is a very interesting picture, which I find a little bit of a mystery, really. It's a postcard size photograph, black and white obviously, taken by a professional photographer called Simnel, I think his name is, in Burton-on-Trent. There are 4 men and a woman standing outside this shop with a Model T Ford van standing outside, and the shop says Edgar Carruthers Limited. It must have been taken, well, certainly between the wars, and there's one man in there who I'm almost certain is my Uncle Guy, and he would be between 20 and 25 years old, I guess. And in one of the windows, it's just got drapers, outfitters and boot factors, and on the other side, it's got the names of all the branches of Edgar Carruthers, and it's astonishing. I would need a magnifying glass to read them, but I have read it, and it covers towns all over the country, not just round Bishop Stortford, like Watford and Hartford and that sort of thing, but it goes right up to Rotherham and Sheffield and Northampton. Anyhow, it must have been at the height of Edgar Carruthers' empire. He had big ambitions, you know, and he had these 6 sons who were supposed to help him in the business, some of whom didn't want to have anything to do with it at all and became farmers, but 3 or 4 of them did, and opened branches around the place. But I mean, what happened in the 1920s were 2 things, 3 things really. 1926 was a general strike. Nobody had any money to buy boots and shoes. Edgar Carruthers' health was failing. He had big heart problems. 1929 was the Wall Street crash. Everything went wrong for him, really. And I think at one point, he was on the threshold of being a big businessman and having a nationwide business. But it really all came to naught. But I mean, there was a lot of talk after the First World War about profiteers, the people who had made money out of the war, and they were regarded as being very unpatriotic and very unpleasant and very immoral. I have to face up to the fact that, to some extent, I suppose my grandfather was one of them.